Hello. This week on Renee Reports, we discuss comedian Dave Chappelle and the controversy surrounding comments that he's made about transgender individuals and the broader LGBTQIA plus community on his latest special on Netflix, The Closer. Chappelle is best known for his brand of comedy, which sometimes can include vulgar and offensive content for some audiences, and his popular program Chappelle's Show, which premiered on Comedy Central in 2003. After the first two seasons, the show was immediately renewed for a $50 million deal, a 2-year contract, but Dave left the show basically before the third season began in 2005. Chappelle has also released 6 stand-up specials on Netflix, earning himself a $20 million per release deal. Chappelle's The Closer was released on October 5th in the US on Netflix and has gained millions of views. However, Chappelle's disparaging remarks about the transgender community raised protests within Netflix and from the LGBTQI plus and allied activists. About 30 Netflix employees staged a walkout on October 20th and joined a rally in Los Angeles. Tara Feld, a senior software engineer who is trans, and B. Pagels Minor, a game launch operations program manager who is also trans, had filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board. They alleged that Netflix retaliated against the workers to keep them from speaking up about working conditions, including Netflix's products and the impact of its product choices on LGBTQI plus community. The employees later dropped that complaint, however. Internal memos by co-CEO Ted Sarandos, hold on one second. Okay. Internal memos by co-CEO Ted Sarandos assert that content on screen doesn't directly translate to real-world harm, and that Netflix doesn't allow titles that are designed to incite hate or violence, and we don't believe The Closer crosses the line. He later told the Wall Street Journal in an interview on October 19th, there are going to be things that you feel are harmful, but we are trying to entertain a world with varying tastes and varying sensibilities and various beliefs. And I think this special was consistent with that. Netflix continued to make the special available for streaming. I watched it earlier today myself, actually, and found that the content was a little inappropriate to share with our general audience, and therefore we won't be playing any clips from The Closer tonight. Now, Raphael Bob Wakesberg, the creator of Netflix's animated series BoJack Horseman, addressed the matter in a series of tweets on December 7th, saying he was mystified by Netflix's decision to air Chappelle's comedy unedited. He claimed that Netflix executives at the streaming service had once asked him to remove a joke from BoJack Horseman over concerns it would offend filmmaker David Fincher, who directed House of Cards and Mindhunter. He said, "My point was it's silly for a network to pretend their hands are tied when it comes to the content they put on their network," he added. The PBS NewsHour addressed the internal conflict at Netflix during their October 20th episode, and we have a clip. I'll go ahead and show that now.
Dave Chappelle's latest comedy special, produced by Netflix, has reached a boiling point. Today, several dozen of Netflix's thousands of employees walked off the job, demanding the company better support its transgender workers. Amna Nawaz has the story.
Judy, this all goes back to The Closer, Dave Chappelle's highly watched special. But employees at Netflix, including some who walked off the job today, criticized that special, arguing it's offensive and could lead to harm of transgender people. In it, Chappelle compares trans identity to blackface and jokes about killing a woman. Now, Netflix's co-CEO Ted Sarandos initially doubled down on his support for Chappelle and the special. Yesterday, he said the special will remain online, but apologized, saying, quote, "I screwed up," and quote, "I should have made sure to recognize that a group of our employees was hurting." Joining me now is Amara Jones. She's the creator of Translash Media. That's a media nonprofit that focuses on the transgender community. She also co-chaired the first ever UN high-level meeting on gender diversity. Amara, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for making the time. I have to point out, even after that acknowledgement from Sarandos saying he screwed up, they're standing by the decision to stream the special. They're saying that it fits into their stance of what they call free artistic expression. And sometimes they say there's just content people won't like. What do you make of the way that they're responding to this at Netflix?
Well, I think that it shows that Netflix signs off on this content from the very highest levels. And we know from reporting from Bloomberg that actually Ted Sarandos signed off on this personally, which is a huge warning sign usually in media companies. When content decisions have to go to the highest levels, it means that no one else wanted to have their fingerprints on it. And what's strange about that is that people want to embrace success within companies. And so I think that what we're seeing from the firing of employees to the personal statements that he made not once but twice last week to the other actions that Netflix is taking, that Ted Sarandos at the highest level of that company believes in this content, believes in the views expressed by it, and as he said last week, doesn't see that there's any real world harm.
Well, explain to me that real world harm, because I think this is what people may question is if they don't understand the backlash, help us understand. What's your concern? What's at stake here?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is that this is essentially hate speech disguised as jokes. And that is an essential point here, that no one is contesting that humor can be outrageous, sometimes offensive, but I think that this crosses the line into hate speech that's disguised as jokes. And one of the ways in which it puts people at harm is that it essentially argues that trans people aren't real. It essentially argues that Black trans people aren't real. And at the heart of the violence against trans people, specifically Black trans people, where we have broken records of murders of Black trans women for several years in a row now, at the heart of those murders, when you look into them, is the belief by the perpetrators that they weren't doing anything wrong. That is to say that the person isn't human. And here we have that reinforced on a massive scale, the questioning of the fundamental humanity of trans people disguised as jokes, which is at the heart of the violence against our community.
Just to underscore that point, Amara, the data does speak volumes here. According to Human Rights Campaign, 2021 is said to be the most violent year on record for transgender and gender nonconforming people. I also want to put to you, though, this other point that the CEO makes, that this is on brand for Dave Chappelle and for his brand of comedy. That comedy is supposed to be provocative. And a lot of his defenders say, look, there are a lot of offensive jokes in here. He jokes about Chinese people. He jokes about Jewish people. He has long made derogatory comments about women. They just say comedy's supposed to be provocative. Shouldn't there be a space for that? What do you say to that?
Well, it's also supposed to be intelligent. And there's nothing intelligent about mocking trans people. There's nothing interesting or provocative about mocking trans people. There's nothing interesting in joking about rape. And it's really hard to see how any of that stands. And what may be different is that in the past, there would be a sprinkling of those types of jokes in his comedy in the midst of other things that were perhaps insightful, all the rest of it. I think that what fascinates me about this special is that if you were to take out all of the anti-LGBTQIA material, there would not be much of a special left. That's pretty much what the entire special is. And he has decided to go out in this final special, he says, not on a high of anything intelligent, but in terms of settling scores with the community that he doesn't like.
We should point out, along with today's walkout at Netflix, that trans employees there have submitted a list of demands to the company: more investment in trans talent, a revision of all the internal processes that decide which content gets made and how it goes out there. Amara, what should we expect to see from Netflix next?
I think that what we should expect to see is more of the same. I think that when you have the commitment from now the most powerful man in Hollywood, from the most powerful streaming service in the world that says it will make commitments to put out $6 billion worth of content next year, when he's behind this type of material, I don't know that we'll see much change from Netflix, although I hope that I'm proved wrong. I think what we should see is what the employees are demanding. What they are demanding is a radically different platform that will allow trans creators the opportunities to be able to be heard.
I hear you saying you would like to see change, but you're not optimistic it will happen. Is that right?
I'm not optimistic in the short term. I do think, Amna, that there are a couple of things that will eat away at Netflix that will drive change. I think first of those, really quickly, is the fact that there are lots of people who are saying that they don't wish to work with Netflix right now. I've had producers and showrunners tell me that. They are having people be fired and resigned. And the third thing is that Netflix may become a stigma brand. That is to say, it may no longer be a place where you're proud to say that you work. And if that's the case, they will lose employees to their competitors who are dying to know Netflix's secrets. And if those employers allow those new employees to not only bring their knowledge, but also this desire for more diverse content, over time, Netflix could be in real trouble.
We'll be watching and following for sure. That is Imara Jones, the creator of Trans Media, joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Hello. LGBTQI plus organizations and activists across the nation here in Seattle are calling on Chappelle to apologize, including the Lavender Rights Project and the Washington Black Trans Task Force. The Climate Pledge Arena has been asked to postpone or cancel this nearly sold-out show on Friday, December 31st at 9 p.m. He'll also be performing in Vancouver, BC at Rogers Arena on April 23rd. That show was originally scheduled for New Year's Day until the date was pushed back because of COVID-19 public health restrictions there. Seattle Pride is among the organizations asking for the New Year's Eve show in Seattle to be postponed. However, it appears the Climate Pledge Arena intends to move forward. The Seattle Times Assistant Managing Editor for Diversity, Inclusion and Staff Development, Naomi Iwasaki, on Monday quoted a Climate Pledge Arena spokesperson as saying, as an inclusive organization, we host a wide variety of performers, including those who express opinions that diverge from our views and values. While we don't restrict the freedom of expression of our performers, we do listen to our audiences and support their own right to free expression in response. To this end, we have met with Seattle Pride to discuss their concerns, and we look forward to building a lasting relationship with their organization. Asaka, added that Climate Pledge Arena did not immediately respond to follow-up questions about whether it has limits or guidelines on who uses the venue, or how bringing Chappelle aligns with its statement that it's the most progressive, responsible, and sustainable arena in the world. Iwasaki's column in Seattle Times this week shares the perspectives of a variety of Black voices on this controversy in Seattle. We'll link to that in the chat. Our panel tonight is here to discuss the matter and offer their informed opinions. First, let me introduce Astro Pittman. Astro was born in Italy, raised in Texas, and has called Seattle home for over 14 years. Astro holds a baccalaureate degree in applied behavioral science and is currently pursuing their Master of Social Work degree at the University of Washington. Astro works with at-risk youth as a drug and alcohol counselor, focusing on queer, unhoused, runaway, and BIPOC youth. Astro is the president of Seattle Central's LGBTQ+ student club, Queer Cooperative, a fully professed guard with the Sisters of the Mother House of Washington, known as the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. They're also award-winning journalist and editor-in-chief at Seattle Central's newspaper, The Collegian. They identify as an advocate for the transgender, sex worker, and queer recovery communities, board member at large of Diversity Alliance of Puget Sound, a group facilitator at Lambert House for LGBTQ+ youth, and the founder of Transgender Day of Remembrance Seattle, also known as TDOR Seattle, the Cis Ally Trio, SISI, and SeattleTransVisibility.org. Astro teaches LGBTQ+ cultural competency workshops for other clinicians, service providers, and organizations, along with a self-created social emotional learning-based curriculum for young men of color called Kings Ride Up, or CRU. They're also a regular guest panelist and speaker for a variety of workshops and events spotlighting LGBTQ+ topics. Astro's mission is to blend these spheres of service and activism into a collective vehicle for social change. anti-oppression, equity, and restorative justice in their communities. Developing research, training, and curriculum specifically tailored to the needs of the LGBTQ plus recovery community is their passion and calling, and they have especially focused on the specific needs and challenges of transgender individuals in their research. Their most closely held dream is to create and run a treatment recovery center for queer individuals from all walks of life of the rainbow, where they receive targeted, trauma-informed, identity-celebrated, and community-focused support from excellent clinicians who identify with their struggles through lived experience and shared identity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Renee.
It's a pleasure. Next, I would like to introduce my friend and frequent guest here on the program, Oliver Webb. Oliver was born, let me pull him in. Oliver was born and raised here in the Pacific Northwest, where he's been involved in activism for nearly 3 decades, focusing on the queer community for the majority of that time. For the past 5 years, he's volunteered mainly within the trans and gender diverse community, working to make resources more readily accessible and expand programming across the state. Oliver currently serves as the Diversity Alliance of Puget Sound Board Chair. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, I would like to mention that Krystal Marx, the Executive Director of Seattle Pride, was scheduled to join us tonight. Unfortunately, I've been notified that due to a medical emergency, she won't be with us. I do want to wish her a speedy recovery and send our love to her entire family. As many of you know, she is a member of the LGBTQIA plus community as an out bisexual woman and the mother of a transgender son. I understand she's at home recovering tonight. Now, in recognition of the specific significance this conversation has on Black LGBTQIA plus individuals, particularly Black trans women, who are the most at risk for violence in our country, I wanted to start the show by centering our discussion on their perspective. One moment. In a statement prepared by Ganesha Gold Buffalo on December 6th, the Lavender Rights Project and the Washington Black Trans Task Force unequivocally condemned the transphobic and homophobic attacks made by Dave Chappelle. I think it's important that I read the statement in full. The statement reads, as our trans community reels for another wave of COVID, increasing barriers to accessing community, the very recent passing of HB 25, among other extremely transphobic bills, passed slyly under the chaos of the pandemic and the racial justice movement, and the recent murders of our trans Black sisters, Royal Poetic Stars, Kier Lepre Cartier, Brianna Hamilton, Deasidor Monet Smith, Angel Niara, Danye Thompson, Markeisha Lawrence, Taya Ashton, Shia Vanderpump, Nikki David, Remy Fennell, Thomas Harden, Pooh Johnson, Tiamari Lewis, Jada Peterson, Miss Coco, Tiara Banks, Iden Evans, Diamond Kyrie Sanders, Kerry Washington, Danica Danny Henson, Tiffany Thomas Demik Lewis, Serenity Hollis, Fiddy Bands, Demik Jackson, Tiana Alexander, Natalia Smut, Bianca Muffin Banks, Alexis Kimmy Icon Braxton, and Black trans brothers Melrose and EJ Boykin, aka Nova Watson. The very last thing we need was another public onslaught, but that is exactly what we got with Dave Chappelle's new Netflix comedy special, which is currently drawing much deserved criticism for its blatant misogyny and homophobia from all the levels of the entertainment industry. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, intersex, asexual, two-spirit spheres, and even from within the corporate Netflix itself. However, some were more defensive of Chappelle. Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos, the mayor of DC, and even the sisters of the trans woman mentioned in the comedy, Daphne Dorman, who died tragically in 2019, rushed to his defense, with Sarandos going as far as to say that his team at Netflix has a strong belief that content on screen doesn't directly translate to real-world harm. Let's talk about why that's inherently wrong. Platforms carry power. Multi-million-dollar platforms, such as the one Netflix has provided for Chappelle multiple times now, carry a lot of power and influence. Power and influence has been abused more often than used responsibly within the colonial history, regardless of intention or falling under the scope of entertainment. And it doesn't stop there. Dave and his cohorts were tapped for a New Year's Eve comedy show immediately following the backlash that's taking place right here in Seattle at Amazon's Climate Pledge Arena, as well as a main stage spot at Netflix's Netflix of the Joke Comedy Festival happening this coming spring in Los Angeles. Both of these entertainment giants loudly state with their actions that they're opting out of standing against transphobia, homophobia, queerphobia, transogenaire in place of profit. Well, not even moderately surprising to the Black trans community, this marks a tipping point in the perpetuation of our continued struggle via hyper-capitalist oppression, and we demand accountability on the part of these major entertainment platforms that represent countless LGBTQIA plus peoples just within their employment base alone, content creators included, not to mention their many investments into community spaces that rely on their advocacy. Consider that in these specials, Chappelle plays no one but himself. He is an actor or a puppet in someone else's film narrative. He's directing, writing, and performing all of his own content, particularly during such a pivotal and vulnerable time within modern history. These words carry a Trumpian weight and can, will, and have encouraged vitriol and violence against the broader trans community. Given his positioning and fame within the Black community, this situation takes an even more dire turn. Let us not forget that this is an issue of white supremacist patriarchal colonialism, the source of all systems of oppression underlying in this discourse between Chappelle and the LGBTQI plus community. The reason misogyny, for instance, is even rampant in the Black community is entirely due to the colonial systems of control. White European settler colonizers wanted to exert control over Black and Indigenous peoples in as many ways as possible after realizing they couldn't simply be wiped out, no matter how invasive or insidious. So the minds of these original peoples were far from the final frontier of the colonial conquest. At some point, it became clear to the colonizers that people are more easily controlled when they aren't allowed a naturally expansive identity and sense of self as it relates to their native community, and forced into a chasm of identity or binary. What's more is that pre-colonially, trans and gender diverse individuals were regarded as sacred and closest to spirit or God, and honored with major leadership roles in many tribal nations. So by taking this away, colonizers were also removing a connection to peer leadership, elderdom, creation, and spirituality among said peoples in such a way that made them blank slates, prime for complete assimilation. This level of complex trauma spans generations, unhealed to the point it becomes normalized. And this is exactly what we're dealing with today. This is also why white critique will always fail to touch on the weight of how transphobia and misogyny remain so pervasive in Black and Indigenous communities, and always subsequently veer into anti-Blackness with their arguments. Therefore, these conversations and discourses should belong to those respective communities alone, outside of exercises on accountability. The Leadership Council of the Lavender Rights Project, Washington Black Trans Task Force unequivocally condemns these transphobic and homophobic attacks against the broader LGBTQI plus community. We rise in support of the trans and queer lives encircling this circumstance, as well as the lives impacted outside of those immediately affected spaces. And we hope that these words strengthen the voices that have already risen in combat of the hatred and ignorance that have been emboldened by the statements in the aforementioned streaming special. This is far more than just distasteful entertainment to place a downvote on. It is an affront to all the work our communities have done collectively against the many fires of systemic oppression. Intentionally divisive content, such as this, labeled deceptively as entertainment and comedy on global platforms, leave more than just a bad taste and an offense. They set our communities back years, leaving a rift in representation and intersectionality that reflects onto our very psyches. Shame on you, Dave Chappelle. you and all of your proponents. Let me bring back our guests. Now, unfortunately, a representative of the Lavender Rights Project was not available to appear on tonight's show. We did ask them on Monday. My first question is to our panel. Now, I know that I agree with virtually everything that we heard there. Does anyone take issue with anything that was said in that statement, particularly that this is a conversation exclusively for Black and Indigenous communities alone?
I mean, I think that obviously the Black and Indigenous communities need to be centered when discussing these situations. I think that they have obviously an important stake in this. Dave Chappelle is a Black man. I think it's important for the Black communities to stand up against this man. He's gone unchecked for decades. I think it's obviously their cross to bear. He's from their community, but it's a trans issue to speak out on. Just leave, Oliver. Just go. As a trans person, I think the trans community was harmed in general. I think that the trans community, the LGBTQ community, anyone he's attacked is allowed to speak out and should speak out. Because he's gone unchecked for so long, it's important that we all stand up and stand against hate speech of any kind. This man believes it's an art, what he's doing. And I think that Amara Jones put it correctly, right? That this isn't an art, that this is hate speech disguised as art. I did watch The Closer today. I had no plans of watching it, but I thought it was important that I watched it. Because those who have seen it hear him repeatedly talking about how our community uses the same talking points in a specific article that happened, I think, 17 years ago. And I didn't want to use the same talking points, allegedly, right? Which would have been his past shows or his past stand-up or the Dave Chappelle show. And it was important to use things that happened in this special in The Closer. So from like the get-go, he is using anti-Semitic jokes. He is xenophobic. He is claiming that, COVID is a Chinese virus, basically. He's making homophobic jokes. He's making transphobic jokes literally the entire time, just like Amara says. If you took them all out, it would be a maybe 10-minute special. And that is maybe because they clap for a long time in the beginning. That's how you get to 10 minutes, if with credits. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely unacceptable. And so we all need to stand up. Anyone who's been harmed by him, he's, calling women names. He's joking about killing them. He's joked for years about killing homeless people. Like, everyone has a stake in this. This man isn't joking. It's not art. And so it's whoever is harmed. So absolutely, because of who he is, the people who fall into that category unfortunately have to stand up. If he were a trans man, if he were a white trans man, then trans people would need to stand up and say, look, we are against him. We are unequivocally against him. And we need to stand up and, go against him. If it were Caitlyn Jenner out there doing this, which it often is Caitlyn Jenner out there, we stand up and say, look, because she's trans, we don't, automatically say we're with Caitlyn Jenner just because she's trans. And it's the same thing. The Black community often has to stand up and say, just because Candace Owens is Black doesn't mean that we ride hard for Candace Owens. So, I think it's a situation like that. But I don't think that that means that trans people as a whole, and I don't know that that's necessarily what that statement was getting at either. I think it was they want to center Black trans women because they are disproportionately murdered every single year in these lists, which you know about as well, because you were part of RTDR Memorial this year. That list, they named it, and it's sad every single year.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into that.
Yeah. So I think we can all speak on it. I think that centering those that are hurt disproportionately is important as well.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I think it was very important for me to read the entire statement and to give those voices, uplift them in any way I could and share their message. Astro, did you have anything you wanted to comment on that?
I mean, I agree with everything in that statement and everything that Oliver just said as well. One of the things that sticks out to me from this particular special is that it feels like Chappelle took the opportunity to take all of the things that people in our society are unduly afraid of when it comes to other demographics, other populations, other experiences, backgrounds, cultures, what have you, right? He took all of those things and tried to take that fear and that judgment and that hate and disguise it as comedy. That's not comedy. All he's actually doing is perpetuating that same fear and hate. And I talk a lot in the work that I do as a social worker about factionalism and how detrimental that has been to us as a species and as a society, as a culture. The folks that usually do that are usually people in power. They want to keep us separated. Like the fact that he talked about, like, I'm a TERF too, like that kind of makes me think of us looking at each other all as people who have been marginalized and have suffered at the hands of white supremacy and colonialism and homophobia and transphobia and classism, etc., right? He's taking all of that stuff and empowering himself as a comedian to sort of purport, to promote, to add to all of that fear and that hate and that oftentimes sort of misinformed perspective about these others, like these, my other hand in here, these others, the folks that don't look like you, don't live like you, don't come from where you come from, right? And all that is serving to do is create more fear and hate and isolation and discomfort, and it keeps us away from one another. It actually pulls us back. It keeps us from getting to a place where we are, connecting, healing, respecting one another, and just progressing as a society. We're not actually able to engage in conversation with one another in a way that is supportive when we have this kind of rhetoric happening from folks who are being seen as somebody to be respected or appreciated or revered in any way. And that's the part that upsets me the most. I feel like when you are put in a position of power, you have an obligation to use it wisely. When people are going to watch you by the millions, you have to use that platform wisely. And he has failed at doing that. And so I think that all the things that have been said in that letter by Oliver, all of that is absolutely true, and then some. I think there is more conversation to be had around the ways in which we should address what has been done and the ways in which it has pulled us away from what I would hope to see in our society, the ways in which we could be less factionalized and be more connected and have more, I hate to use the word tolerance because that sounds like I'm putting up with your shit, We need acceptance, like genuine acceptance of each other's experiences in a way that removes the idea of harm and fear and hate, right? We all should be allowed to be who we are and do what we do and not have anyone else feel threatened by that if we're not coming for them. If I'm not coming in your space, making you uncomfortable near you, it doesn't matter what I do. Whatever I do in the privacy of my own home or the way that I choose to express my gender or my orientation sexually, whatever, like that's my business. And for someone to sort of negate that and shut that down and make jokes about that, It feels, for me at least, like it's set us back by a couple decades.
Likewise, Seattle Pride has also issued a statement on December 9th about Chappelle's comedy show in Seattle at Climate Pledge Arena. It reads, internationally known comedian Dave Chappelle is bringing his controversial blend of comedy to Seattle's Climate Pledge Arena on New Year's Eve, December 31st. His October Netflix special, The Closer, included transphobic remarks and cheap shots made towards the LGBTQIA+ community. Despite requests for its immediate removal from the streaming platform, Netflix continues to run the comedy special, and Mr. Chappelle has doubled down on his problematic, harmful comments. Seattle Pride is concerned that Mr. Chappelle's powerful homophobic and transphobic remarks are being given a platform at Seattle's new Climate Pledge Arena. The arena claims to be the most progressive, responsible, and sustainable arena in the world. However, we do not see how this can be the case when they are hosting an individual who refuses to acknowledge and now is further perpetuating his harmful statements. From the Washington Post, October 7th, quote, jokingly referring to himself as transphobic comedian Dave Chappelle, the comic later pivots to commenting on trans people. Some of his jokes include anatomy, such as when he compares the genitalia of trans women to vegetarian substitutes for meat products. At one point, he defends J.K. Rowling and says he's Team TERF, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, for agreeing that gender is fact, unquote. From GLAAD, a tweet, Dave Chappelle's brand has become synonymous with ridiculing trans people and other marginalized communities. Negative reviews and viewers loudly condemning his latest special is a message to the industry that audiences don't support platforming anti-LGBTQ diatribes. We agree. Seattle Pride is calling on Climate Pledge Arena to live up to their claim of being the most progressive and responsible arena in the world. They must postpone Mr. Chappelle's performance until he issues a sincere apology to the transgender community and acknowledges the harm he causes when he normalizes anti-transgender belief and denies the complexities and nuances of gender. Krystal Marx of Seattle Pride met with arena officials last week. Can Climate Pledge Arena have it both ways? Can it be the most progressive, responsible, and sustainable arena in the world while also hosting Chappelle's brand of comedy?
This has some strong feelings of, or reminds me a lot of when the Seattle Public Library hosted Wolf back in 2019, which was like a TERF organization that came, and we asked them not to host them, and SPL stood strong, again claimed that it pretty much the same things of like it's a library and that sometimes that, you know, people come with differing opinions or beliefs, and that they were going to let them come, and that there was a big protest on both sides, and they let them come, and it was a big, huge issue. And the person who I don't know what his position, maybe he was president at the time of SPL, but he's no longer in that position. But it was another situation where it was Seattle, it was a big name, and they weren't following the beliefs of this city, and they weren't protecting the interests of this city. And at the end of the day, it comes down to money. It comes down to the interests of the contracts that these places get. They don't really care what the city wants, what the people and the beliefs of the place they serve want. A lot of times we talk about Seattle being progressive on paper. We are not the city that we claim to be. And I think it's in the Seattle Times article that Lavender Wrights did, and I think that they touch on that as well. And I think that that Geisha also, or sorry, I don't think that that's there. I was getting their name mixed up. But that in the article that you read earlier by Lavender Wrights also touched on as well, that she touched on that we aren't the city that we claim to be in a lot of ways, that we're not as progressive, at least in like the leadership in the companies that in the major companies, and we have billions in these cities, billion-dollar companies, major companies, and we need them to stand up for us, because when they don't, there's huge ramifications, right? When Netflix says, no, we're going to keep Chappelle, it's a huge blow to this community. And so many people know that we asked for pride flags to be half-masted for TDOR. Tacoma did half-mast the first trans flag in Tacoma history, possibly Washington history, and then the Pacific Science Center lit the arches. Well, we had called dozens of city halls, we called the major arenas. Well, I called the climate pledge change arena and talked to someone and never got a call back. So they're not following through with their beliefs. They're not backing our community in any way. There is no reaching out to this community. They're giving lip service to us. There is this whole like virtue signaling of like, oh, we hope to partner with Seattle Pride in the future, blah, blah, blah. It's just lip service. They wanted money. They wanted a big name in Chappelle. It's the same thing people have been doing for decades and bending over backwards for this guy for no reason. He's been gross and he's been trash for decades. These are the same jokes he's always been saying. He's never been funny. There's never been jokes. It's literally all about the money. What Shelley just said, it's literally about the money. That's all it is. He's a big name. And so when people bring him in, it's a sold out show at the climate change arena. That's what it is. That's all it is. They're not going to cancel it. They're not going to postpone it no matter what we do. It's not going to happen. We can all go down there. We could all go down there. We could protest it and that show would still go on. In fact, all that would do was give them more press, which is why no one's doing that. Because they don't it's all it's going to do is give them more money. People let that man smoke on stage in historical buildings. They will bend over backwards and give this man whatever he wants. And it's ridiculous. And all he's ever been is gross and made these same jokes. So no, you can't have it both ways. It's owned by Amazon. That's all you need to know. It's an arena owned by Amazon. If we ever thought that they were going to follow through on this, if we ever thought that it was going to be this amazing, best arena in the world, we had to look at who it was owned by.
Now, both Astro, do you want to address that?
So, Oliver, everything that you just said resonates with me. I always say to folks who are trying to figure out where the disparity or the problem or the hate, the issue is, follow the money. Somebody's making money off of somebody being a dick, basically. So this is the same, right? This is another situation of profits over people. And this is another situation of, on paper, saying all the things, putting together this statement that makes you look like you're focused on equity and diversity and inclusion and progression and support of all people. But when it comes down to the wire, and you have an opportunity to make money off of somebody who is maybe against all of that, you're going to take the money. That's what we're seeing happen here. And what I've said to a lot of people is, as much as you might be curious about what this like whole scandal is about, don't actually log on to Netflix and watch this thing, because he's getting royalties every time you log in and watch the closure. And yes, people had to watch it to know this was happening and to raise the alarm, right? And that's necessary, and that needed to happen. But at some point, it just sort of becomes, the controversy becomes the thing that makes the money flow for them. And I think they're sort of feeding into that and expecting that. And that makes me sad, that people who are genuinely just wanting to be curious in a way of like supporting the right thing, they're going to watch this for that intention, but they're also giving him another dollar as they watch. And so every person they talk to about this spins that, right? It like adds to the money pile that Netflix and all of their subsidiaries and partners are making. And so even though this is a very negative situation, the hullabaloo that's been created by this is actually making these people more money. And so I always say, when you find the money trail, stop playing into it. Don't give them another cent. They have already shown that they are not with us. They are not on our side. Do not engage with them. And if you click on their stuff, you are engaging with them. Every time you click that button on Netflix to play something from Dave Chappelle, you are giving him more money. You are giving Netflix more money. You are creating more of a reason for them to keep supporting people like him, because they're seeing more hits, right? Every person that clicks onto that show is another person that they see as a participant, as a watcher, as someone who is paying for a subscription and engaging with this material. So we need to all sort of stop. We already know what's happening. We already know that it has happened, and we need to not give them any more of our dollars. And I think that's the best thing that we can do, other than, yes, we can, protest and do all of that, but we need to just stop clicking on anything that has to do with anybody like Chappelle. We need to show them, by denying them our dollars, that we reject everything that's being presented to us by these platforms, by these people, and anyone who supports it. So pull away, right? Mm-hmm. There are other ways to find entertainment. You don't need to subscribe to Netflix. So if Netflix is supporting people who do this kind of stuff, disengage, cancel your memberships, stop doing it, go somewhere else. That's the best way we can raise our voice, because when they see the money drop, they see those dollars drop, and they realize that there are so many of us who are either LGBTQIA plus or allies who have said, no, we're not giving you our money, they will change their behavior, because they have to, because we have taken away their profit. And that's the thing we need to remember, is that we have power in where we subscribe, where we show up, what we pay attention to, what we watch. And that's really important, that we remember that viewing is money for these platforms, right? So stop viewing and stop paying them money. When they realize that so many of us have said, no, this is not okay, we're going to pull away our support with our money, they have to change. That's the thing we need to remember.
Sorry. I would ask both of you, because you organized Trans Day of Remembrances. Astro, you did Seattle. Oliver, you did Tacoma. So you're keenly aware that violence against Black trans women, and trans people in general is disproportionately high. Can you speak to that?
Do you want to go first, Astro?
Sure. So, as of November 20th, when TDOR is held, there were 54 transgender or non-gender conforming people who had died by direct violence based on their expression of gender. We don't even know how many more people were killed because of that it maybe wasn't reported appropriately. But we know for a fact that at least 54 people in the United States and its territories were killed, like murdered, by someone else simply because they were transgender or gender diverse. That's the largest number we have ever seen since we have started reporting in 1999 after Rita Hester happened, and that sort of like drew attention to the concept of transgender people being uncomfortable or a threat or a reason to incite violence by others in our society. It's never been this bad. I really thought that because of COVID-19 and isolation and remote work and remote learning and all these other things that have been happening, that it would actually protect transgender and gender diverse people from some of that violence. But I was wrong. What has actually happened is it's incited more fear, more hate, more disparity, more separation, more confusion about what living out loud, just being who you are, what that looks like. And so even though people have not gone to work as much and have not, been on the bus or in the car or out in public as much, when they are, if they're transgender, the fear and hate and confusion that has been created partly by the Trump administration prior to Biden coming in, and also partly because people are suffering more now. And when people are suffering more, they dive more into their fear and their confusion and their hate because they want somewhere to place blame. And I feel like that's been what's happening, is like a culmination of those situations. Like Trump sort of promoted that. COVID-19 has also made that more viable for people. Poverty, all the things that we've been going through over the last couple of years. It has created a situation where even though we're not out as much, like out in the world, out in public as much, when people do see you and you are not fitting into the binary gender spectrum, they are coming for you. They're afraid of you. They feel like they need to have a space to plant their hate, their fear, their confusion, their anger. And unfortunately, most of that has come down to the transgender and gender diverse community, which is unwarranted. But that is what has happened. And so for Chappelle to come in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of this sort of like, we're politically polarized and socially divisive. And so for him to come in and use his platform to say these awful things is just encouraging hateful, fearful, confused, trapped, struggling people to act on all of the stuff that they have been internalizing, all of that fear and hate and angst and confusion, right? Like when a young person goes to a high school and shoots up their fellow students, it's kind of the same thing as what Chappelle is promoting. That young person who goes into that high school and chooses to take out other people, they probably were being bullied. They probably had a bunch of hate and fear and judgment put upon them, right? And they didn't have the capacity emotionally or cognitively to bear that. They snapped. They went back to that place where they were experiencing all of that harm, and they got retribution, right? So Chappelle is promoting the same kind of rhetoric that creates those young people that we know as Columbine and all of the other, high schools and middle schools where a young person grabbed their parent's gun and went into their school and intentionally took the lives of other people. That's what Chappelle is doing. And so above all other conversation that we could have about Chappelle, I think that's the thing we need to really focus on, is that he is actually becoming the incentive, the impetus of other people who are watching him and believe in him and love him. He is encouraging them accidentally to go out and do harm to the people that he's making jokes about. So we're going to see people die because of Chappelle's rhetoric. And if we think of nothing else about this entire conversation, I think that's the most important piece. What he has said to people who love and endear and follow and embrace everything he has to say, he's given them permission, just like Trump did in his time. He's giving them permission to go out and act upon this hateful rhetoric, this hateful ideology, and turn it from thought to action, which means people will die. That's the part that frightens me and upsets me and makes me want to raise my voice. And I'm sorry for kind of being long-winded here, but this is important that we say this out loud, that we call this out. People are going to die because of what Chappelle has said. Mm-hmm. If we think of nothing else about this conversation, that's what we need to focus on. And if we know that that's true, and we do know that it's true because we've seen the pattern of this from previous, other folks who have sort of spewed the same kinds of rhetoric, the same kinds of hate and fear, we know that this is the outcome of that kind of conversation. So if we know that that's true, we must raise our voices. We must show up. We must protest. We must defy. And we must stop giving our money to anyone who is backing Chappelle as an artist. That's not artistry. That's hate. Someone is going to die because of what you've said. How dare you? I will leave it there. But we need to think of that. I think that that's the most important part of this conversation because it's the truth.
Did you want to have the last word, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, Astro hit on some amazing points, as Astro does. I mean, the part about being in the pandemic, right? So I think we all hoped that these numbers would go down, and they didn't. I think us being online all the time had so much to do with this. I think that the Trump era really brought out so much hate, which I've talked about in the past on here. 4 years of just hatred and allowing that to come forth. And then we've spent so much time online because we're stuck at home, dealing with this pandemic. And then there's a lot of fear, right? So fear was seeded several years ago under that administration. All sorts of different fears, unfounded fears, from racism to homophobia, anti-Semitism, transphobia, just anything you can think of, right? And so then now we're stuck in our homes, and that fear is happening on the internet in real time. And then we have these performers that are then putting it out as art. And so there are these really big names that people have learned to trust, right? J.K. Rowling, Chappelle, these other people, and now they're coming out to back these people. We just had J.K. Rowling had all these thousands of different performers and authors back her. And so we have these people backing these people. And so the fear of trans people, or the fear of Black people, or the fear of Asian people, or whatever crap fear that is living in these people's minds is now festering because we're in the middle of this pandemic. And so it's all they have all this time and energy to put into it. And like Astro's saying, people are going to die. And so Chappelle doesn't see any of this. He's just a stand-up comedian. That's it. And if you watch The Closer, you can very much see this. He repeatedly says these things about, well, they have these talking points from 17 years ago, or I've heard this from all these women who think I hate women. Why do they think this? Because you hate women, dude. You hate women. That is why they're saying this. If multiple women think you hate them, it's because you hate women. It's because you're doing something to make people think you hate women. If people think you're going to harm them, there's a reason that lots of people are saying this. And he said several things that really hit me, right? So he said this thing about he's jealous of gay people, and he said it as a joke, but it's paramount to this thing of all people who are homophobic are closeted gay people. And that's not a real thing, and it's something that we shouldn't keep perpetuating, because what that is saying to cis heterosexual people or to allies who joke about this is that people can't harm people of the LGBTQIA plus community because they're just closeted gay people, or they're just closeted trans people, or they're just jealous of us. When in reality, there's actual hatred happening. So if he just says, I'm jealous of gay people, then he gets away with that, right? Or it's just a joke, or that person's closeted. There's no joke. Some people could be closeted, right? That could be internalized homophobia, but not everybody's in the closet. That we need to stop making this weird, get out of jail free card for everybody. You can't just sweep it under the rug and say this isn't hate speech. It's all hate speech. That's all this is. He makes other comments about gays are minorities until they need to be white again. He has, when we talked about black trans women are disproportionately murdered, he doesn't see that because he sees all gay people and all trans people as white. So he doesn't see his community as gay or trans. He doesn't see them as that, when his community are the most harmed part of our community. So that is the biggest problem here. He is intentionally harming our community as the LGBTQI community. And in doing so, he's harming black trans and black LGBTQIA people, and not even realizing he's harming people in his community because he sees them all as white. He has taken it out. He's compartmentalized it so badly that he's like, well, they're all white, so it doesn't matter. I'm just harming white trans people, or I'm harming white gay people. And in reality, he's going to harm black trans people. He's going to harm black gay people, because that's who gets murdered at the end of the day. It's going to be a black trans person. Yes, his friend was a white trans woman who was bullied into killing herself because of his bullshit. But the majority are going to be black trans women that are dying. And it's ridiculous. It's so unacceptable.
I'm sad to say we run out of time because
we always do. We're all long-winded. I don't know how we thought we were going to fit Krystal in here.
I don't know, because I have so many more questions I was going to talk about. I do want to thank you, Astro Pittman, for coming on the show. You're a journalist, social worker. Thank you, Oliver Webb, board chair of Diversity Alliance of the Puget Sound. Both of you are with DAPS. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I do want to make a quick announcement, and that is me and my moderators will be taking the next couple weeks off because of the holidays. We do want to wish you and your family the best possible holiday season that we possibly can. And we encourage you, obviously, to be safe, especially because, it's important to get tested, to get, the vaccine, and to get your booster, because we don't want to give anyone in our families COVID-19. Also, I wanted to mention that when I come back, I'll probably be promoting an interview that I did with Christine Gregoire for a cover story in United Seattle Magazine. Nate Gowdy, the photographer on the project, was also a photographer for Rolling Stone. Mother Jones did the cover of Time Magazine. He took the photos for that, and they're just amazing. So I can't wait to share that with you in the new year. And I think that's it. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know this was a tough topic. We had a lot more that we could be saying about that. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope all of you have a good night.